The story of Gideon in the Bible is one of the most captivating narratives, illustrating how God uses ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things. Gideon's story is primarily told in Judges chapters 6 to 8, during a time in Israel's history when the nation was going through cycles of rebellion, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. This was the period of the Judges, when Israel had no king, and God raised leaders called judges to deliver his people from their enemies. The people of Israel were caught in a recurring pattern of disobedience to God, which led to oppression by foreign powers, cries for help, and eventual deliverance through a judge. At the beginning of Gideon's story, Israel is in the midst of one of these cycles. The Israelites had once again done evil in the sight of the Lord by worshiping the gods of the surrounding nations, and as a result, God allowed them to be oppressed by the Midianites, a nomadic people who would invade Israel every year at harvest time. The Midianites, along with the Amalekites and other eastern peoples, would swarm over the land like locusts, devastating crops and livestock, leaving the Israelites impoverished and in hiding. This period of oppression lasted 7 years, and the Israelites were reduced to living in caves and mountain strongholds, desperate for relief. It is in this context of national despair that the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. Gideon was a young man from the tribe of Manasseh, and when the angel found him, he was threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Threshing wheat is normally done in the open, where the wind can carry away the chaff, but Gideon had to hide in a winepress, a pit, or trough used for crushing grapes because of the Midianite threat. The scene immediately conveys a sense of fear and oppression, with Gideon trying to eke out a living in secret. When the angel appeared to Gideon, he greeted him with an unexpected and seemingly ironic message. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Judges 6:12. Gideon, hiding in a winepress and consumed with fear, hardly saw himself as a mighty warrior. His response revealed his frustration and doubt. "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Were all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." Judges 6:13. Gideon's reply reflects the sentiments of many who wonder why God allows suffering, especially when they have been told of his past miracles. He was skeptical, perhaps even bitter, questioning where God had been during Israel's suffering. But the angel of the Lord did not engage in a theological debate with Gideon. Instead, he commissioned him, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Judges 6:14. The angel's message was clear despite Gideon's doubts and feelings of inadequacy. God had chosen him for an important mission. Still, Gideon was hesitant. He questioned how someone like him, an insignificant member of the weakest clan in Manasseh, could possibly save Israel. Gideon viewed himself as the least in his family and his family as the least in the tribe. But the angel reassured him, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Judges 6:16. God's promise to be with him was the key to his success, not his own strength or ability. Even with this reassurance, Gideon was not immediately convinced. He asked for a sign to confirm that it was truly God speaking to him. He prepared an offering of goat meat and unleavened bread, and the angel instructed him to place it on a rock. The angel then touched the offering with the tip of his staff, and fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. At that moment, the angel disappeared. Gideon realized he had seen the angel of the Lord and feared for his life, as it was believed that no one could see God or his messenger and live. But the Lord reassured Gideon, telling him not to be afraid, for he would not die. In response, Gideon built an altar to the Lord and called it "The Lord is Peace." This encounter marked the beginning of Gideon's transformation from a fearful young man to a courageous leader. However, Gideon's journey to fully embrace his calling was not without challenges. That night, the Lord commanded Gideon to tear down his father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Baal and Asherah were Canaanite deities, and their worship was widespread among the Israelites at the time. Gideon was to replace these idols with an altar to the Lord and offer a bull as a sacrifice. This act was significant, as it symbolized the rejection of false gods and the restoration of true worship in Israel. Gideon obeyed, but out of fear of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in broad daylight. The next morning, when the people discovered what had happened, they demanded that Gideon be put to death for desecrating Baal's altar. But Gideon's father Joash intervened, challenging the people to let Baal defend himself if he truly was a god. From that day on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, meaning let Baal contend, because he had torn down Baal's altar and survived. With this victory over idolatry, Gideon began to emerge as a leader, but the real test was yet to come. The Midianites and their allies once again invaded Israel, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. He blew a trumpet, summoning the men of Israel to follow him. Gideon sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they responded to his call, gathering an army of 32,000 men. However, God had a different plan. He told Gideon that the army was too large, and if they were to win the battle with such numbers, Israel might boast that they had saved themselves by their own strength. So God instructed Gideon to tell the men that anyone who was afraid could leave. 22,000 men departed, leaving Gideon with only 10,000. But even this was too many for God's purposes. He told Gideon to take the men down to the water for a final test. Those who lapped the water with their tongues, like dogs, were to be separated from those who knelt down to drink. Only 300 men lapped the water, and it was with these 300 that God promised to deliver Israel. The rest were sent home. This drastic reduction in the size of the army was intended to demonstrate that the victory would be the Lord's, not the result of human strength or numbers. Gideon's army had been reduced by over 99%, and now he was left with just 300 men to face an enemy that was described as thick as locusts, with camels that could not be counted. God then gave Gideon one final encouragement. He told Gideon to go down to the enemy camp at night and listen to what the Midianites were saying. Gideon took his servant Purah and went to the edge of the camp, where he overheard a Midianite soldier telling his friend about a dream he had. In the dream, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the Midianite camp, struck a tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. The other soldier interpreted the dream, saying, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." Hearing this, Gideon worshipped God and returned to his camp, filled with confidence. He divided the 300 men into 3 groups, and gave each man a trumpet and an empty jar with a torch inside it. They approached the Midianite camp under the cover of darkness, and at Gideon's signal, they blew their trumpets, smashed their jars, and held up their torches, shouting, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The sound of the trumpets and the sight of the torches caused confusion and panic among the Midianites. Believing they were under attack by a much larger force, they turned on each other with their swords and fled. Gideon's 300 men stood their ground, and the Lord caused the Midianites to destroy themselves in their confusion. The Israelites pursued the fleeing enemy, and the remaining Midianite leaders were captured and killed. Israel was delivered from the oppression of the Midianites, and the land had peace for 40 years during Gideon's lifetime. However, the story does not end on a completely triumphant note. After the victory, the Israelites asked Gideon to rule over them, but he refused, saying, "The Lord will rule over you." Despite his refusal to become king, Gideon made a mistake that would have lasting consequences. He asked the people to give him gold from their spoils of war, and with it he made an ephod, a priestly garment or idol, which he placed in his hometown of Ophrah. The ephod became a snare to Gideon and his family, as the people of Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it, turning away from God once again. Gideon had 70 sons by many wives, and after his death, one of his sons, Abimelech, tried to make himself king, leading to further bloodshed and turmoil in Israel. Though Gideon had been a faithful servant of God, his story serves as a reminder of the dangers of pride, idolatry, and the tendency of the human heart to stray. After the victory over the Midianites, Gideon returned as a national hero. His success in leading just 300 men to defeat an overwhelmingly larger force had cemented his reputation as a mighty leader chosen by God. Israel experienced peace and stability under his leadership for 40 years. However, Gideon's story highlights the complexities of leadership and the challenges that can follow even after great victories. During his time as a judge, the people of Israel enjoyed a rare period of peace and security. The Midianites, who had terrorized Israel for years, were no longer a threat, and the Israelites could once again cultivate their land, rebuild their homes, and live without the fear of invasion. For 40 years, Gideon led the people wisely, ensuring that they turned to God for guidance and provision. His leadership was characterized by humility and faith, as he had consistently refused to take credit for the victory, recognizing that it was God who had delivered the Midianites into Israel's hands. Despite this peace, the seeds of future discord were quietly growing beneath the surface. Gideon's decision to ask for gold from the people and create an ephod, a priestly garment that somehow became an object of worship, would lead to spiritual consequences that would reverberate long after his death. Gideon's request for gold was likely well-intentioned. After the battle with the Midianites, he asked for a portion of the spoils of war, primarily in the form of earrings that the Ishmaelites, one of the tribes allied with the Midianites, had worn. The total weight of the gold collected was substantial, amounting to about 1,700 shekels, which is approximately 43 pounds. In addition to the gold earrings, the Israelites gave him other valuable items, such as ornaments, pendants, and purple garments that had been worn by the Midianite kings. With this gold, Gideon fashioned an ephod, an item typically associated with the high priest in Israelite culture. The ephod was meant to be a sacred garment used in seeking guidance from God, but in this case, it became something much more dangerous. Gideon placed the ephod in his hometown of Ophrah, likely with the intention of honoring God. However, the people of Israel soon began to treat it as an idol. They worshipped the ephod, turning away from God and committing spiritual adultery by engaging in idolatry once again. This act reveals a critical flaw in Gideon's leadership. Although he had led Israel to military victory, his actions inadvertently led the people into spiritual defeat. The ephod became a snare for Gideon and his family, as well as for all of Israel. Despite the peace and stability he brought during his lifetime, the legacy of the ephod would haunt the nation for years to come. In addition to his political and military role, Gideon's personal life also contributed to the complexity of his legacy. He had many wives and fathered 70 sons. This large family was a reflection of his power and status, but it also introduced internal divisions that would later contribute to civil strife in Israel. One of Gideon's sons, Abimelech, was born to a concubine in Shechem, a city that would later play a significant role in his story. After Gideon's death, the Israelites quickly forgot all that God had done for them through Gideon's leadership. They turned once again to the worship of Baal, building altars to the god Baal-berith and abandoning the Lord. Gideon's influence, which had kept the people faithful to God during his lifetime, dissipated after his death, and Israel fell back into its cycle of sin and rebellion. Gideon's son Abimelech is one of the most tragic figures in the Bible, a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences of moral corruption. After Gideon's death, Abimelech sought to consolidate power for himself. He traveled to Shechem, where his mother's family lived, and convinced the leaders of the city to support him in his bid to become king. Abimelech used the fact that he was their relative to gain their loyalty, playing on their desire to have one of their own in a position of power. With their backing, Abimelech hired a band of reckless men, essentially mercenaries, to help him carry out his plan. In one of the most brutal acts of treachery recorded in the Bible, Abimelech went to his father's house and killed all 70 of his half-brothers, ensuring that there would be no rivals to his claim to power. Only one brother, Jotham, survived by hiding. This massacre shocked Israel, and it demonstrated the extent to which Abimelech was willing to go to seize control. Once Abimelech had eliminated his competition, the leaders of Shechem crowned him king. This event marked the first attempt at establishing a monarchy in Israel, even though God had not yet ordained a king for the nation. Abimelech's reign, however, would be short-lived and fraught with violence and betrayal. After Abimelech was crowned king, his surviving brother Jotham appeared on Mount Gerizim and delivered a parable to the people of Shechem. This parable, known as the parable of the trees, was a scathing indictment of Abimelech's character and the foolishness of the people for supporting him. In the parable, the trees sought a king to rule over them. The olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine all refused, stating that they were content to fulfill their purpose. However, the thorn bush, a useless and destructive plant, accepted the offer, saying it would rule over the trees, but it would bring destruction if they did not honor its reign. Jotham's message was clear. By choosing Abimelech, a man of violence and treachery, the people of Shechem had chosen a thorn bush to rule over them. His rule would not bring prosperity or peace, but rather destruction and bloodshed. Jotham prophesied that Abimelech's reign would end in disaster, and his words would soon prove true. Abimelech ruled for 3 years before God sent an evil spirit to stir up dissension between him and the leaders of Shechem. The alliance that had once secured his rise to power began to unravel. The people of Shechem, disillusioned with Abimelech's leadership, began to plot against him. In response, Abimelech attacked the city, killing many of its inhabitants and destroying its strongholds. His thirst for power and revenge drove him to commit further atrocities, including the burning of a tower where men and women had sought refuge. Abimelech's downfall came when he attempted to conquer the city of the Bez. As he approached the city's tower, a woman dropped a millstone from the tower, striking Abimelech on the head and mortally wounding him. In his final moments, Abimelech, concerned about his legacy, ordered his armor-bearer to kill him with a sword so that it would not be said that he had been killed by a woman. Thus Abimelech's reign ended in the same violence and treachery with which it had begun. The story of Gideon, from his humble beginnings as a reluctant leader to his rise as a mighty warrior and judge, is a testament to the transformative power of faith. God took an ordinary man, full of doubts and insecurities, and used him to deliver Israel from its enemies. Gideon's victory over the Midianites is one of the most remarkable examples of God's ability to bring about victory through unlikely means, demonstrating that success comes not through human strength, but through divine power. However, Gideon's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, idolatry, and the pursuit of power. His creation of the ephod, though perhaps well-intentioned, led Israel into spiritual decay, and his many wives and children created a legacy of internal strife that would plague the nation after his death. The rise of Abimelech, Gideon's son, and the subsequent bloodshed that followed is a stark reminder of the consequences of ambition and the corrupting influence of power. Gideon's life, like the lives of many biblical figures, is a mixture of triumph and tragedy, faith and failure. His story challenges us to examine our own lives and consider where God might be calling us to step out in faith, even when we feel inadequate or unqualified. At the same time, it warns us to guard against the temptations of pride and the subtle ways in which even good intentions can lead to harmful outcomes. In the end, Gideon's legacy is one of both hope and caution. He shows us that God can use anyone, regardless of their background or doubts, to accomplish his purposes. Yet he also reminds us of the importance of remaining faithful to God's commands and avoiding the pitfalls of idolatry and ambition. As we reflect on Gideon's life, we are reminded of the power of faith, the necessity of humility, and the enduring truth that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness.